All right, welcome back to The Right Hook at 5 minutes past 5 o'clock. Off now to my next guest, Eddie Hobbs, financial expert, of course, and contributor to the book, Own Our Oil, The Fight for Ireland's Economic Freedom. Well, we're not going to talk to Eddie about oil, we're going to talk about water, because, of course, oil and water don't mix. Eddie Hobbs, welcome to the programme.
Good morning, George, or good afternoon, I should say.
Yeah, your views on this? Are they very strong? Are you passionate about this?
Well, I mean, water is just one of our other natural resources, and whether the water protesters know it or not, George, they're campaigning on a fisher line that between the Irish people, which is us, and the state. And this has been left unaddressed. And, we'll see now that the government are trying to drop-kick this out into the future over the next few years, and they're talking about bringing in primary legislation, to suggest that Irish water would never be privatised. But that's not the issue. The issue is the actual constitution itself. Now, that constitution, 1937, was framed at a time by De Valera when, the state was being venerated because the empires had destroyed themselves in the First World War. And there was a lot of fear of socialism and so on. So you had extremes, for example, in Italy and Germany, as we know, but also you had clerical fascism in Spain. So the state became all powerful. And when he was framing the 37 Constitution, and it really reads in a jarring way these days, when you look at Article 10, which most people won't do, and I didn't either until quite recently, you will see that the state has taken unto itself the ownership of all our natural resources, including water. It doesn't state that it's the trustee only acting on behalf of the common good for the Irish people. It says it is the owner. And until such time as that's changed, we have a fundamental problem where the natural resources of the country, as far as our relationship as the Irish people are to them, is at a greater distance than what it was when we were under British rule and monarchy and the Magna Carta.
Okay, but hold on.
To change.
Who is the state? I mean, I thought the state was us, isn't that?
That's the very fundamental point.
Yes.
The state isn't us. The state is the establishment, if you want to call it that. The state is the Republic of Ireland, of course, which was later declared. At the time, it was the Free State. Now that is. But
Eddie, yeah? Who else do we want to own the water except the state?
No, there's a separation between the state and the Irish people, George. Fundamental separation, which is why the Constitution was written to give guiding principles of law. And in a lot of constitutions, the natural resources of the country are owned by the people and not by the state. The state acts as a trustee on behalf of the people. Now, when you have a trustee acting on your behalf, as you have, for example, in a pension scheme, and the trustee, you own the assets, but the trustee is acting on your behalf, and the trustee fails in its duty of care, then it's actionable through the courts. But that's not the case because of the way the Constitution is framed. So the Constitution can't be actioned through the courts. So we have a crazy situation where the state has taken the ownership of the assets from the people, claiming that it's acting for the common good, but can't be taken on through the courts. Now, if we had a proper constitutional amendment, properly framed by constitutional lawyers, which reversed that situation, it would mean that the Irish people, when it comes to natural resources, wouldn't have to go out and protest on the streets, but instead, where you get a petition hitting the right mass of signatures, can take their action through the courts.
All right.
Against the trustee. Now, I know that sounds pretty convoluted, but that's a fundamental fisher line between the protesters and the state. All right,
but also, of course, because you have written about it, and it's something like the issue of oil or gas, or this applies to everything, does the Constitution? The state owns oil, gas, everything, does it?
It does. It's taken it unto itself. Now, it didn't in the 1922 Constitution. It clearly stated that it was acting as the trustee. It didn't state it was the owner. And, this is a very, very important matter because while it may very well be the case that primary legislation is now going to be brought in to protect Irish water from being privatised, the question we have to ask ourselves is that in an act of self-preservation, which we saw the state doing to preserve itself during the course of the crisis, as evidenced, for example, by the Croke Park Agreement and Haddington Road Agreement, would the state have sold Irish water had it pre-existed the crisis.
Oh, I get it. All right, I get that part, that the crown jewels that the state would possess, one of which will be Irish Water in the future, which say is worth X billion or whatever. The country goes through another crisis like it did before, and the government suddenly says, look, we got some worth a few billion here. We sell this off and to save our bacon. Now, can I ask about privatisation here? That the British government after World War II, that Labour government privatised publicly owned old pilot things. Isn't that right? One of which, for argument's sake, was railways. And they suddenly discovered that public ownership of railways just didn't work. They couldn't make money, or they couldn't, or whatever. So they suddenly said, look, the only way we can do this is by privatising it. Now, why would it be wrong to privatise the operation of water, which again the British have already done? Now, if you look at the British experience, what would you have learned from the British experience that would act as a warning to us?
Well, it comes down to, I mean, I'm not familiar with the British setup to that level, to that degree, but
yeah.
the point is this. Let's just come back to the Irish situation and the crisis recycling. And you're absolutely right to mention it, because if we get another major international hiccup, Ireland, it would happen at a time when Ireland is trading now at the very extreme ends of debt to income ratios. In other words, we'd be right at the front line. And in a situation like that, unless the Irish Constitution is changed at this crucial point, all that would be required, in my opinion, would be for an act of the Dáil to change any primary legislation now envisaged, to reverse the situation and flog off the water. Whereas if the Irish Constitution is changed to state, as it ought to have stated, that the natural resources of the country are owned by the Irish people, then the state cannot do so, even through an act of the Dáil. It cannot do so. It would have to go to the people with a constitutional amendment, and the people wouldn't allow it.
All right, but Eddie, aren't the British people much more supine than us? In other words, when water in Britain was privatised, the British weren't on the streets, to the best of my memory, right? So therefore, I don't know now. I'm not a proponent or opponent. I'm just trying to find out, what would we be afraid of in selling water, in your opinion, having studied this as much as you have?
Well, there's no problem in the state acting as a fiduciary, acting as a trustee, in leasing out parts of any natural resources to a private company. For example, the Constitution could be changed so that such leases couldn't extend beyond, say, 50 years. But leasing something is completely different from passing the ownership of it to a private company.
All right.
That's a crucial difference. And you know, and I would say to those involved in the water protest movement, go and look at this carefully, because this is the core issue. The government may cool the issue now down by changing the pricing structure for the next number of years, hoping to drop kick this into politics in 2017 or 2018, which gives breathing time to start rallying around changing Article 10 of the Constitution so that the ownership of our natural resources rests with the people.
Okay.
Irish water, by its creation and its behaviour, has simply indicated to us that during the crisis years there has been no reform. Because what we've got at the end of it is a new quango coming out, enjoying a monopoly position on the most vital of our natural resources, paying itself bonuses. Now, they may roll back on the bonuses, and there may be arguably breaches of contract law. It depends on how it was structured. But the reason why they're rowing back, and the reason why the Taoiseach and the government is rowing back today, is not because of any altruistic motive or any logical motive. It's because it's an act of self-preservation, because the Irish people have stood up to them, those that haven't been out and protested, those involved in social media, those that have been raising their voices. And I'm saying to all those, and I'm writing about this tomorrow in the Irish Examiner, George, is that the rallying point now that things are cooling down a little bit, is to call for and campaign for a change to Article 10 of the Irish Constitution, so that never again can the Irish people be threatened by the loss of one of their own natural resources to potential third parties. Regardless of what the government says to the contrary, that is the case until the article is changed, George, because governments come and go, ministers come and go, and political self-preservations will rise and dip depending on economic cycles.
All right, thank you so much. That was Eddie Hobbs, financial writer.